Welcome back to Off the Chart, Xtra's 8-part podcast devoted to the groundbreaking Showtime series, The L Word, and the LA lesbians we just can't stop thinking about. With the reboot literally just about to launch, we've been looking back season by season at how the original series revolutionized queer women's representation, getting it wrong as often as it got it right. Yes, we relived The L Word, so you don't have to, and you are very welcome. On this final episode of Off the Chart, we made it. We're sharing our thoughts on Generation Q. That's right, Jennifer Beals hooked us up with the first 3 episodes, so thank you, Mayor Bette Porter. I'm Erica Lenti, senior editor at Xtra, and I would really like to know how Shane has maintained the same haircut for 15 years.
I'm Michelle Turingen, managing producer of video at Xtra, and I want to be a guest on Alice's talk show.
I'm Rachel Giza, the editorial director at Xtra, and I think I am finally over Bette.
And I'm Eternity Martis, senior editor at Xtra, and I want to be Angelica's cool older sister.
I think you already are that cool older sister type.
We have the same hair.
Okay, so before we dish, let's catch up to speed on where we're at today. So it's been 15 years since the L Word first debuted and a decade since it wrapped in 2009. So let's briefly talk about how LGBTQ culture has shifted since then. Rachel, can you maybe start us off?
Yeah. In the U.S., marriage equality finally came into place in 2015. That was 6 years after the first run of the L Word ended. And I think a lot of the battles that sort of ripped from the headline stories that were in the original series, like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, marriage equality, second parent adoption, a lot of those civil rights have been settled legally here in Canada as well. Although I would argue that we're in a moment where it feels like a lot of those rights, particularly in the U.S., feel like they are poised to be withdrawn or certainly are under attack right now in this moment.
How about you, Shell?
Well, there's a pronounced shift amongst the LGBTQ2 communities to fight for more rights for our trans and non-binary communities. A lot of outward transphobia and stigma toward those communities. So we're seeing that reflected more in the show, but we'll talk about that later.
How about you, Eternity?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more awareness of bisexuality and it not being a phase, like it's here to stay. And now bisexuals make up over half of the LGBTQ community. So there's been a whole lot more discussion about the bi umbrella as well as biphobia and bi people's health. So goodbye to quote unquote dirty bisexuals.
Yeah, and in terms of pop culture and where we're at today, queer women are everywhere. We talked a lot about how the L Word's popularity was due in part to the fact that there was like nothing like it on TV at the time. But now I pulled some stats, GLAAD's annual report. There are now more LGBTQ stories being told on television than there ever have been before. And 2019 was actually the first year ever that LGBTQ women outnumbered LGBTQ men on TV. Shows like Euphoria, Tales of the City on Netflix, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. There's all these shows that have tons of really strong queer female characters. And then even if you consider things like the pop charts, like Hayley Kiyoko is out there, King Princess, there's lots of queer women that are just dominating culture right now. So obviously we've talked a lot about the original L Word's strengths and a lot about its shortcomings. And a lot of our discussion is focused around, how the revival can atone for these sins. So maybe let's talk a bit about what our big expectations and hopes are for the reboot. What can it do to make up for all of those faults that we've previously discussed?
Thinking about the arc of television from the time the first series started to this new reboot, we're in this era of peak television where the medium itself has been taken so much more seriously and has become so much more interesting in its possibilities. So for me, what I wanted going into it was something as compelling and gripping and obsession-worthy as a show like Succession, a show with brilliant writing, brilliant acting, twisty, fun, fascinating plots, and memes, all kind of memes. That's what I was hoping for with the reboot.
More diversity, please. I really love that one of the new main characters, Micah, is Asian. We saw no Asian characters in the original L Word series. Actually, the only Asian character I can think of is Bette and Tina's sperm donor, Marcus's girlfriend. who was in one episode and was a hot mess. So it's really nice to see Micah join the cast. With critically acclaimed movies like Crazy Rich Asians and The Farewell and network TV shows like Fresh Off the Boat really making waves in the pop culture landscape, it's clear to me that audiences are obviously really hungry to see themselves in the media that they consume. So representation matters.
Yeah, and to go back to that point, I think that a little more representation of what LA looks like would be great. So as we mentioned in one of our earlier episodes, LA at the time was full of Black and Latinx people, and we didn't really see that with the original cast, not a whole lot at least in the main group. And so I'm hoping that we get more of Bette talking about being a Black woman, more Black and Latinx characters coming through this time, and something that's more representative of LA.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well, more trans characters. I mean, we know that from the trailers and from the outset that Micah was going to be a trans character. And then just that, no awful theme song. I don't know. That's just I think that's a very small ask, but no Betty. And we're not the only ones who have high or, I guess, low hopes for the reboot.
Hi, this is Katie Sketch. I was on the L Word Season 2, Episode 2, with my band The Organ. I guess my hopes for the new show is that it's as trashy and if not trashier than the original L Word. I mean, obviously it's not going to be as impactful. There's so much queer stuff on television these days. It's like a queerorama out there. But they can still kill off all the most important characters, and they can still have characters whose personalities just completely change for no rhyme or reason between episodes. So I look forward to that.
I remember when The Organ appeared on the L Word.
It was the music video, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, and Carmen was there doing.
She was a production assistant.
She was a production assistant, and Shane drops by.
Yep.
And they make Mad Passionate Love to one of our songs.
Their banger of a hit, Brother.
I think they have sex while the video is being shot
probably,
or something. It was in a cathedral or a church or something like that.
Yes, yeah. And I think all the bandmates were wearing white.
I guess the idea is that we were like angels in a church. I believe, and I'm hearkening back some deep memes here because this was a while ago, we had to be on set about 6 a.m. We dressed the way that we would have dressed if we were doing our own music video, which is to say we were wearing dirty jeans, dark t-shirt with a print on it, some sort of large, obnoxious, mid-2000s print. And we got there and wardrobe had a different idea for us. They gussed us up pretty good, put us in all white, and they put lots of gold jewelry on us, and it was horrifying. We took off all the jewelry, and some of us changed our clothes, and I took off most of my makeup, and we felt badly about that, but we definitely would have felt worse if we had been on television looking like straight angels in a church.
Fun fact, if you're from Toronto, Katie from The Organ actually ran RIP, the Hen House out in the West End, which was a lovely LGBTQ hangout spot that I miss dearly. They had the best pancakes.
Okay, for the last time, let's recap Generation Q. And don't worry, we won't spoil anything. Before we get into that, let's set up a bit about the new show. So it's still our good friend Eileen Chaikin who's producing it, but she's passed the torch over to Marja Lewis-Ryan, who's an openly gay filmmaker, and she's the new showrunner. And as we all know, Gen Q follows some of our old friends from the original run of the L Word and some new folks. So let's talk about the old characters who are joining us in the new generation.
So Bette Porter is back in LA running for mayor.
Mayoral candidate Bette Porter.
Los Angeles has been very good to me, and I believe it's my turn to give back to the city that I love so much.
If she wins, she would be the first female and the first out lesbian in the role. Alice Pieszecki now has her own Ellen-esque TV show, of course, called Alice. She's also in the role of stepmom with her new partner, Natalie, played by Stephanie Aylin, a.k.a. Tig Notaro's wife. And Shane McCutcheon is rich. Apparently, she had a salon empire that she recently sold.
She has her own plane.
She has her own private plane. She still hasn't cut her hair. She's moved back to LA and is reunited with her old pals.
And then there are a bunch of new characters as well.
Yeah, so there's Dani Nunes, who is played by Arian Mandy, who is this ambitious overachiever who works at her father's pharmaceutical company, but she's having second thoughts about that. And then there's Sophie Suarez, who is played by Rosany Zayas, who works on Alice's talk show Alice. She's a producer with a huge Latinx family, and she is in a long-term relationship with Dani. Then there's Sarah Finley, who is played by Jacqueline Taboni, a.k.a. Finley on the show, who works with Sophie and Alice on Alice's talk show as a production assistant. So she's this laid-back, really easygoing person who is always broke and doesn't really have any game whatsoever.
So how do you feel about it?
Feels swirly right here in this area.
That's love, bro.
No.
Yeah.
She basically embodies Scooby-Doo or Goofy, not in that order. Either one works. And then there's Michael Lee, who is played by Leo Sheng, who is a trans man and Dani and Sophie's roommate. And he's falling for the super hot guy who just moved next door.
So we all saw the first 3 episodes. Maybe we can talk a bit about our first impressions.
So I think that the show, from my first impression, was trying to be too woke and progressive already, like from the Generation Q title, which was like the first warning.
We are
Generation Q.
To all these like references that I caught like very like early on from like period sex and then a forest of armpit hair and references to Time's Up and men who like ask women to smile, the opioid crisis, and my girl Roxanne Gay got pulled into it. And then everyone talks the way that people think millennials speak. So people were just like, yeah, and not forming complete sentences. So I found that like just the trying too hard to like get the millennial voice in did the opposite as a millennial watching this.
Okay, boomer.
From the L
To the Q.
we are
Dreamers.
activists,
Heartbreakers.
Non-conforming.
on the chart.
side hustlers.
Who's asking?
I'd rather be a boomer right now. If this is what people think that we are, sign me up for boomers.
Yeah, I think we really need a bit of time, and maybe I'm just being really generous to get to know the new characters. I think right now we're lacking that context and background around why they do the things they do that we have with the older characters. So that's what's made me more endeared to like Bette and Alice and Shane, because we kind of understand their motivations for things. My only exception is Angelica, who is the best, and I would probably watch an entire spinoff of just her as Bette Porter's daughter.
Well, I agree with both of you, Eric and Eternity. And I also felt that the reboot was kind of conservative and conventional in its portrayal of queer life. I mean, I will say it opens with a sex scene that is so explicit that one of our Kinsey 5 gay male coworkers who was watching it with us was visibly shook by it. But overall, I think that the way that sex is dealt with on the show is kind of as something that carries a lot of emotional negativity or shame. There's one character who says they can't have sex unless they're drunk. There's another character who has a hookup through an app and then later goes on a bit of a shame spiral about, God, I always do this and I shouldn't do this. It just feels like the way that they portray sex amongst this circle, particularly of the younger folks, is a little bit more conventional and conservative. And there's also a plot tied up in a proposal and then a lead up to a wedding.
You know what's gonna happen?
What, Dani?
You're gonna think I'm never gonna propose.
Oh, I already think that.
And one day I'm gonna pull off this elaborate move and it'll all be for you.
So it didn't feel like sort of super queer in that way to me.
As someone with a deep affection for the original L Word series, I really love all of the callbacks.
And how is Lenore?
Oh, stop.
I can't believe you still want to my mom.
She's an attractive woman, Al.
Lenore. In a pitch staff meeting, Alice says to one of her writers, I did vaginal rejuvenation back in 2004, which is a nice little throwback when Alice did that and ran into her ex, Gabby DeVoe. Dani asks Bette if she's hiding any secrets because she's running her PR campaign and she's trying to see if there's anything that her opponent can use against her. And Bette mentions that she was arrested at a protest for civil disobedience, which of course is a reference to when Bette was the director at the California Arts Center and got jailed. And there was that very hot sex scene with our good Carpenter friend, Candace. And we do find out what happened with Jenny Schechter and Tina Kennard. So there's like all of these wonderful references, you know, all of these little hidden gems that only the most devoted to the show would catch. So I really loved those.
That hiatus felt really long. It felt like a decade, right?
I missed you. I missed you more.
So now that we've seen the first few episodes, how do you guys think that the reboot is measuring up against sort of the expectations and hopes that we talked about previously?
Well, for me, I think my two expectations were that Bette would start talking about what it's like to be a Black woman and that there'd be more representation of Black and Latinx characters. And both have kind of happened. I think actually the conversations about race so far are meeting my expectations. And there's a scene where Bette was talking about what it means to be a Black woman for herself and her daughter, which I thought was kind of nice because back in the original series, it was always really brushed over. And yeah, so the show is more representative now of what LA is now and in the earlier 2000s. So there are more Black and Latinx characters, and there's more Latinx culture and music this time around, which is really nice.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before. Obviously, one of the biggest critiques of the L Word was this lack of trans representation or not great representation overall. So it's really great that we have more of it. We obviously have Micah, played by Liu Sheng, who is a trans actor. And there are a couple of side characters played by trans women and whose gender identities are not like the focal point of their storylines, which is really nice. My only beef thus far, without giving away too much, Micah does feel a bit sulky at times, and I don't want this to become another Max situation. So I've got my fingers crossed. I'm very optimistic that they will not go down that road.
So in terms of my expectations, like I want to see more Asian characters. We do have Micah. I mean, we're only 3 episodes in, so we'll see if there's more. But something that I did find delightful was that I felt like the character development for all of our ride and dies, like Bette Porter, Shane McCutcheon, Alice Pieszecki, like they feel like where their stories have gone over time feels really plausible. It makes sense that Bette would be running for mayor of LA. It makes sense that Alice would be hosting a talk show. And I guess it makes sense that Shane is still a lovable, sad fuckboy. I guess it maybe doesn't make sense that she's bawling now, but
it's true. But also, I think like now it makes sense that they're friends in a way. Where before it never felt that way.
Right.
Maybe it's just the money. I don't know. But now I'm like, I can see this. Like they're actually friends.
Yes. Yeah, they're all in the same sort of class, and in terms of wealth and in terms of like place in life, it seems like they're all in the same spot, whereas it didn't feel that way in the original series. So I agree.
They also have a shared history now, right? So we buy them as friends because we've seen them as friends already.
For me, I'd sort of echo again what other folks were saying about, the show being more diverse. And I would say there's also, I think, a greater kind of sophistication in representation as well. So you have not just more Latinx characters, but I think a broader spectrum of Latinx communities represented on the show. And so I think all of that is great. But I think the show feels very safe to me. Right now, and again, these are just the first 3 episodes. It feels slightly undercooked and the stakes feel low. There doesn't feel like there's a sense of like surprise awaiting. And I have to say, I almost missed Jenny. Like I feel like, when I think about the pilot of the first series, having Jenny enter this group was a way that kind of set a lot of things in motion, both good and also brought a lot of turbulence. And I feel like that turbulence is missing. And so some of the juice and the thrill, I think, that was there in the original series pilot was kind of absent for me in these first 3 episodes so far.
Yeah, we could really use a villain.
Yeah, we could use a villain. We could use somebody who is more unpredictable, I think.
So what else do you all want to see moving forward in the season?
I would like a little more clarity on what happens to Jenny. So, like, we do get that clarity, but I just feel like there might be more. Like, I feel like we got Shonda Rhimes here. So it can either be, like, a throwaway and, like, this is it and seals Jenny's fate. Or there could be more, and we don't know. And so I'd like to actually know, like, is this it? Or could there be more to this story?
Is there another murder mystery? Question mark.
Will Mia Kirshner come back? Question mark. Right?
As a ghost.
As a ghost. With Sounder. For me and Rachel, we had this conversation before. This idea of like flipping expectations on their head, I would love that. I would love to see a trans character who's like a total slut as opposed to someone who's like a very safe character, to your point. Or like I'd love a character, instead of being very virtuous and righteous, to make a major misstep. Like that's kind of what was so lovable about the original series. There were characters we liked and didn't like, and they all made decisions that we either agreed upon or didn't agree upon. And I think that's kind of missing. And like I said, Jenny kind of riled people up. I'd love someone like that. So we'll see what happens moving forward.
I would like to see more intersectionality stories around the queer community. Like, being queer only makes up a small part of who a person is. And I think we see a little bit of that around the socioeconomic differences in Sophie and Dani's relationship. So I'm interested to see like where that storyline goes. Queer folks, have issues around faith and religion. Queer folks have issues with being queer and like their culture. Like, I want to see where the show takes the intersectionality. Like, I want to see those stories.
I think picking up what Eternity said about wanting to find out what happened with Jenny, I do feel like there's still some details about the sort of decade or so gap between where the original characters were and where they are now. And so, like what actually did happen to the various relationships that are no more, or relationships that emerged in this, in that intervening era, to kind of get a bit more of the backstory of what happened.
And for those of our listeners that are wondering if Bette makes a return for the theme song music, I am happy to report that they do not. It seems that the opening credit music changes from episode to episode, which is actually really nice. I think in the very first episode, the opening credits start with Lizzo, Better in Color, which is a banger. Yep. The end credits song is Peaches, Boys Wanna Be Here, which is a classic. And like my favorite music drop is that the guest walkout music on Alice's TV show is Le Tigre's Decepticon. So they have a very good music supervisor this time around.
Our journey has finally come to an end. We have made it. Go team.
Go team.
We've talked, we've laughed,
we've
loved, and lived.
Fighting, fucking, crying, drinking, etc.
I think I'll watch it again, though. I would actually watch it again.
Really?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm done with it. After unpacking it so much, I feel like I'm ready to close this chapter of my life of watching the L Word.
I feel like I would watch like season 3 and 4 maybe again. I thought those were some of the stronger, like there was some fun stuff happening in those seasons. I think, you said earlier, Shell, in talking about representation matters, the original has had a lot of flaws, and this reboot will have a lot of flaws, but it's almost like, I think why I don't think we have to support things uncritically, but I also think that, how many bad sitcoms, nighttime soaps are there about straight people, right? And so out of hundreds and hundreds of things, then a few things rise and become phenomenal and amazing. And I think, what struck me is kind of generationally thinking about how this first series kind of paved the way to allow for better representation, better writing. And I know I've like harped on this a lot, but I also think like we've developed this kind of very engaged way of being fans of things by being able to talk at something through social media and to be able to debate it. And I think that it's been interesting to reflect on when you still don't have a lot of representations of your experience in the world, to be at a place to watch them at the kind of beginning stage of thinking, well, maybe now this will grow. Maybe we won't have just like one L Word, but we'll have 10 shows, and there'll be soaps and there'll be sitcoms and there'll be dramas. And I think it's been really interesting to talk to all of you about, this is what we do. We cover LGBTQ2 culture. And so I think thinking about the people who make culture about our lives has been really special to have that opportunity to talk about it and think about it.
It has been incredibly special. I'm so glad we could all share this together. It's been great.
And bond over Shane's leather outfit. Rip.
Okay, well, that's a wrap on Off the Chart. Thanks for listening to Xtra's 8-part podcast devoted to the groundbreaking Showtime series The L Word and the LA lesbians we still can't stop thinking about. Will we ever stop,
We'll never
friends?
Stop.
I'm Erica Lenti.
I'm Michelle Turingen.
I'm Rachel Giza.
And I'm Eternity Martis.
Off the Chart is produced by Corey Mesquita and Rachel Matlow. Our theme is by Kid Coolit. If you've enjoyed this, great news. Even though season 1 is over, we're coming back with season 2 of Off the Chart. Shell and I will be recapping the new Generation Q reboot, and this time we're watching it along with you. So stay tuned for that, launching Monday, December 9th. And Mia Kirshner, if you're listening, we still want to chat. Send me a you up text. Until next time.
You're my best friend.